World War I. The desperate cries of millions rang throughout the European sky. Death razed the lands, leaving a dark trail of blood and bone. Mass graves held fallen soldiers, and widowed women and orphans roamed the streets. Germany, depleted and abandoned by their allies, had nowhere left to turn to. Defeat was imminent, and it left the German government no choice but to request an armistice on November 11, 1918. They asked for an armistice on the terms of the USA's President Woodrow Wilson's 14 points, which highlighted his idea of self-determination. Through this, they hoped that they would be granted a lighter punishment, since Wilson was known for his morality and, unfortunately, his naivete. The victorious Allies grouped together in Paris in 1919 to form a treaty of peace, and Germany and her allies were not allowed a seat, much to their chagrin. Paris was not an ideal location for the peace conference because most representatives, such as the British Prime Minister David Lloyd George, preferred a neutral territory as to not cause a statement. However, Georges Clemenceau, the French Prime Minister, insisted that the conference should occur under the roof of the Palace of Versailles, just a few miles out of Paris. Although there were 66 representatives total from over 32 different nations, the heads of the Paris Peace Conference were the leaders of France, Britain, America, and Italy. These four men, Vittorio Orlando, Italy's president, David Lloyd George, Britain's prime minister, Clemenceau, the prime minister of France, and Woodrow Wilson, America's president, were dubbed the Council of Four and often met privately, only accompanied by their advisors and some experts. Eventually, it was narrowed down to only those four, with their advisors cut off and experts only occasionally invited. The Council of Four made all of the important decisions, and delegates of other nations appealed their cases for land or other materials to these four.
The Paris Peace Conference lasted 6 months, starting in January 1919 and only officially ending at the beginning of 1920. Although the Treaty of Versailles, the vital treaty that concluded World War I, was completed and signed on June 28, 1919, the conference went on, and other treaties that settled obscure European borders were written later. The Treaty of Versailles introduced the idea of the League of Nations, heavily influenced by the idealistic Woodrow Wilson, and decided on Germany's punishment. France, a western neighbor of Germany, wanted Germany to be disarmed and significantly smaller to pose less of a threat in future wars. They were concerned that, should Germany revolt and rise up, they would not have the funds and the manpower to survive. Italy had similar thoughts and sided with France for most of the discussions related to Germany. After the war, Germany was left in economic crisis and likely would not be able to pay as much as France and Italy desired. They wished to wring Germany of most of its money, to further increase their safety and decrease Germany's power. They were wary of a possible German revolt and pushed for the demilitarization of Germany. This was debated among the Big Four because although it was agreed that Germany needed a decrease of military force, they also needed a functional military to ward off internal rebellions and protect themselves from the Bolshevik Russian. The Bolsheviks had taken power in Russia, and the threat of their spread of the government loomed over their neighbors. President Woodrow Wilson returned to America for a short break in the middle of February, and by the time he returned to Paris on March 14th, the military terms were nearly complete. Germany was left, even as the Allies admitted, with something closer to a police force than an army. They were allowed an army of only 100,000 men, a navy of 15,000 men, and only 6 ships, and no air forces, tanks, or submarines. Weapons were prohibited from being imported to Germany, although they could produce their own weapons. At a minor scale, this was only a meager military. They had no way to participate in any aggressive war. Furthermore, the British proposed that German fortifications along the coast should be torn down. However, America argued that Germany deserved to defend themselves, especially considering their navy was limited. Britain's Lloyd George compromised that the defensive fortifications would be accepted, while offensive ones would be illegal.
Collectively, the Council of Four decided that the blame of World War I should be pinned on Germany. This was expressed in Article 231 of the Treaty of Versailles, popularly labeled the War Guilt Clause. This is one of the most controversial clauses in the entire treaty, because taking blame meant that Germany had to lose territory, be demilitarized, and pay for reparation. The figure that they had to pay couldn't be decided among the peacemakers. The public was worrying for Germany to pay, and because each of the Big Four had to worry about becoming re-elected. They were bound by the will of their people. However, they knew that Germany wouldn't survive a crushing fine. Eventually, they gave a special commission 2 years to decide on the figure, which enraged the Germans. They argued that they were in a sense being forced to sign a blank check. America sympathized with them and wished for a figure to be in the treaty, but it couldn't be settled, and the check remained blank. Even at the beginning of the Paris Peace Conference, it was agreed that Germany should lose all of her colonies. Their colonies provided them with the military advantages and multiple resources, which the peacemakers believed that they shouldn't have. The question that remained was what to do with the colonies. Although some colonies were powerful enough to become independent, others, such as some of the African colonies, were weaker and wouldn't be stable without another nation to support them. It was later decided that the colonies would go under possession of the League of Nations, proposed by Wilson, and not be annexed by a single nation.
The establishment of the League of Nations was Woodrow Wilson's main goal and purpose throughout the Paris Peace Conference. A commission for the League of Nations was approved on January 25, 1919, much to Wilson's satisfaction. The League of Nations was, per its name, a league of allied nations. They were to make important decisions regarding international affairs together, much like its successor, the United Nations. Wilson viewed the League as a vital centerpiece for peace. Without it, he believed that peace wouldn't stand. If terms were unfair or borders were left hazy, the established League could settle it later. If Germany's colonies were taken away from her, the League could enforce it. It would be the guardian angel of peace, Wilson believed. He insisted that it should be the first task at the peace conference, prioritized above all else. Lloyd George, from Britain, agreed with him, since his liberal tendencies compelled him to the idea of a war-preventing league. Clemenceau wanted to see the German issue settled first, but hastily consented to begin by dealing with the League, not wanting France to be known as the ones to block it. However, he felt trepidation about the League, worried that international cooperation wouldn't be enough to end future wars. "I like the League, but I do not believe in it," he once remarked. The League of Nations that Wilson proposed wasn't thought out in detail, and many delegates, such as Jan Smuts of South Africa, found it indistinct. Smuts took it upon himself to transform Wilson's unclear ideas into a coherent form and wrote a paper titled A Practical Suggestion that detailed all the necessary specifics. His paper was well received, much to his happiness. Even Wilson himself approved of it, and when he finally set his own ideas down, it seemed he had borrowed many resolutions from Smuts. The first draft of the League of Nations was completed on February 13, 1919. It presented the thought that the League should have no united army, yet there would be no compulsory disarmament. All members would have to respect the territory of others, and all decisions had to be unanimous. The requirement of unanimity for all decisions made it difficult for progress to be made quickly, since unanimity is hard to achieve. However, this clause went through, and the League was proved to be inefficient and ineffective in decision-making. France, Britain, and America found themselves at odds when it came to the League of Nations. France wanted a League army, which Wilson furiously dismissed as unconstitutional. The British representatives were skeptical about the entire idea of a League of Nations, but went along with it as much as they could. The French were adamant about Germany's exclusion from the League of Nations, which Wilson consented to. On April 28th, during a plenary session, the Covenant for the League of Nations was approved. Wilson was incredibly pleased with the results, happy that his main goal was achieved. America, however, never managed to join the League, much to Wilson's dismay, due to opposition from the Congress. Although the League seemed like a possibly bright idea, it was ineffective and could do nothing to prevent the start of World War II. It was meaningless from 1939 and pronounced dead in 1946, with its authority transferred to the newly established United Nations. The Treaty of Versailles, signed on June 28, 1919, in the Palace of Versailles, was a peace treaty that concluded World War I, composed by the Allied nations. Its unfair treatment of a defeated and depleted Germany incited unrest in Europe and resulted in the eruption of World War I. The Treaty of Versailles was the death warrant of millions and can be clearly labeled as a diplomatic failure. It was a shattering peace, a peace in pieces, and that kind of peace can never last.